I was in traffic the other day, and I noticed someone with a coexist bumper sticker. It piqued my curiosity because it wasn't the original coexist bumper sticker. It was updated from religious symbols and had the gay symbols built into it. This encouragement not to breed seemed to support the idea of the left as a sort of death cult. They love everything that doesn't result in life: homosexuality, abortion, euthanasia, and so forth. So, shouldn't the ultimate woke bumper sticker not say coexist, but no exist? This presentation is based on how the nature of the Senate has changed in America. In any republic, the Senate is the highest seat of power. Look at the Roman Republic, for instance. Under the Articles of Confederation, the federal layer of government had one branch, the Senate. It was a collection of delegates from the states. After we created the Constitution, we moved from a pure republic to what Cicero called a mixed form of government. From now on, it would be based on the three classical forms of government, namely monarchy, aristocracy, and republic. The president stood in for monarchy. The Senate occupied the place of aristocracy, and the House of Representatives answered to the purposes of a republic. In this early version of the United States under the Constitution, the president really only existed for international affairs and those territories outside of the United States. Domestically, the Senate had most of the power. In fact, it was more intertwined with the executive branch than it was with the House of Representatives. Today, we're encouraged to think of the Senate as just an adjunct, a Siamese twin to the House of Representatives. In fact, it was more aligned with the president early on. According to Profiles in Courage by John F. Kennedy, he provides a history of the Senate. And he talks about how initially, the Senate wasn't just tied to the presidency insofar as they had to collaborate on picking Supreme Court justices or diplomats, but the Senate originally stood in place for what we today think of as the president's cabinet. They were the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of this, and the Secretary of that. This gave them extraordinary power in the executive branch. Little by little, though, they were muscled out, and their role vastly diminished as the power of the states was diminished when a central bank took over, and we transitioned away from the states running the country to the financial class running the country, using the executive branch as its instrument. But consider how in the original Constitution, the Senate was the main avenue of power on the federal level. One tip-off that this was the case was that congressmen only are given 2 years in power before they have to be reelected. The president was given 4. Senators, by contrast, were given 6. You can see the power distribution according to how much time and influence they were accorded. Likewise, in the Constitution, the Senate appears before the President and the House of Representatives. This is why in the 18th century, they were referred to as members of the first branch. Even an uber-liberal like Ruth Bader Ginsburg refers to this when she wrote, "In 1853, Judah Benjamin declined the nomination of President Millard Fillmore to become an Associate Justice of the United States Supreme Court." Just elected U.S. Senator from Louisiana, Benjamin preferred to retain his first branch post. His choice suggests that the U.S. Supreme Court had not become the co-equal branch it is today. She's making a reference to the original constitutional America when the Supreme Court was not a branch of government. The court was originally under the executive branch. The Founding Fathers referred to senators as members of the first branch, congressmen as members of the second branch, and the president presided over the third branch. That's 3 branches. 1, 2, 3. Count them. No mention of a Supreme Court as a branch. This is why Judah Benjamin didn't want to give up his seat as a member of the first branch in the Senate to go to the Supreme Court. He saw it as a demotion. At any rate, senators were the first branch, as historian Charles Beard calls them in this passage, of an economic interpretation of the Constitution of the United States, where he writes, "Roger Sherman believed in reducing the popular influence in the new government to the minimum. When it was proposed that members of the first branch of the national legislature should be elected, Sherman said that he was opposed to the election by the people, insisting that it ought to be by the state legislatures." Note how, just like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Charles Beard refers to senators as members of the first branch. Regarding congressmen being members of the second branch, Beard writes, "Baldwin immediately opposed the proposition, saying he thought the second branch ought to be the representation of property, and that in forming it, therefore, some reference ought to be had to the relative wealth of their constituents, and to the principles on which the Senate of Massachusetts was constituted." And the presidency, mentioned third in the Constitution, was of course referred to as the third branch. Today we're encouraged to think of the Senate as an adjunct of the House of Representatives. In fact, it was vastly more aligned with the executive branch early on in America, and to be more blunt, it was more powerful than the executive branch. The Senate was there from the time of the Articles of Confederation. The presidency was the add-on. Originally, the president was much more like how we consider vice presidents today, kind of useless, appearing to do ribbon cuttings at supermarkets. As the Senate ran the country, the president was relegated to non-state territories and doing deals with foreign countries. Internally, he was not the main domestic power in the country, not even close. The Senate was. These early senators were much more dominant back when the states they represented were much more dominant in running the country. The early senators were much more powerful, much more patriotic than later senators became, which is why they fought the early introduction of a central bank or America's introduction to the League of Nations during World War I. To short-circuit the Senate, the oligarchs imposed the 17th Amendment, which changed the nature of how a person made it to the Senate. Instead of being appointed by state legislatures, hence being one step removed from party politics like a Supreme Court justice, the new format was to have them be popularly elected. Now they needed money to run campaigns. And who would provide that money? Why, the oligarchs, of course. According to John F. Kennedy, before the Civil War, the Senate was filled with statesmen and philosophers. After the Civil War, they were no longer representing their states, but they became the senator from Big Oil, the senator from the railroad trusts, the senator from Wall Street. The states lost all power, and the Senate became a confraternity of corporations. The New American Magazine is now on Locals. It's a for-pay platform for like $5. It gives you access to extra content and allows you to support your favorite hosts. As I said before, think of it like throwing some coins into the cup of a street performer. Check it out at thenewamerican.locals.com.